Scientology could be called, well, you could call it a religion of religions.
Howdy everybody, and welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast with your host Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. Today's podcast is going to be shorter than usual because I'm going to put some rules on me and my ability to speak. I might put some rules. We'll see what happens, but I'll try and control myself because I'm reading out something by someone else. So I got to control myself and I got to let that person speak, and I won't say much. But basically, this is something about the golden age of tech 1 from 1996. It's about it. It's written by John Nunes, the CS or senior CS of the Advanced Organization of the Great Plains over in Kansas City. And I haven't fully read it, but I was starting to read it and I was like, oh, this is pretty good data, this is good. So maybe I'll just enjoy it by reading it for the first time properly myself, and I'll read it as a podcast. And I think you'll like it. Yeah, so he's a CS, so obviously he's been around Scientology for a long time. And I won't say much about this because I haven't even read it, but I assume that it's his observations about, the golden age of tech. And I think I guess it's important to bring it up because it was really the golden age of squirreling. It was a screw job. It was a con job. It was changing the tech. And it really affected Scientology's stats. Like, honestly, like Scientology was affected when Miscavige took over in the 80s, when there was the corruption and the takeover and stuff. There was, stats went down and stuff, but Scientology still, because it was such a big thing, continued to grow and stuff. And, it's still a fairly big thing, but the golden age of tech around the time of 1996, that was a big hit that Scientology took. And we need to. I guess it's good to listen to this because you can find out how squirreling happens. Because I think we get tricked into thinking that squirreling is when somebody says, "Hey, I'm doing blah, 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 blah with crystals and shit in session and I'm making up thingos," and it's just like, no. That's not really what squirreling is. Squirreling is, things are more shifty here on Earth. And if someone's squirreling, they hide it and they pretend like they're not squirreling. That's how things work in this world, You got Michael Jackson, who's a pedophile. It's hidden. Do you see what I mean? And it goes on for years and years and years and years, and only finally does the truth come out. He doesn't dance around on stage saying, "Hey, I'm a pedo. Yeah, I'm a pedo. Oh, but you baby." You know what I mean? Like, everything here on Earth is hidden and secret, and that's a realization I've had in reading the Mission Earth books by L. Ron Hubbard, because Hubbard mentions a lot of truths about stuff here on Earth, and what it is it's like, hold on a second, yeah, the Earthlings don't respect the truth. That's the thing. That's what's the problem. They don't have a high regard for the truth. They don't think that it's necessary to say the truth that often. And a lot of the time they lie in order to try and get ahead. It's like a kind of okay thing amongst the Earthlings. And I noticed that when you go to places like Thailand or whatever, or third world countries, and I imagine it's really big in India, because I noticed it amongst them in Australia. It's kind of like a thing amongst their culture where lying is kind of like okay. It's kind of like it's just expected for people to do it. And I'll go and I'll do a job for an Indian, and I noticed that they would be analyzing me more. and I could see that they're like trying to read me, trying to spot for lies, and it'll be like, oh, it's because it's part of their culture and they're used to lying and they're used to people screwing other people over, and so they're assuming that I might be doing that to them. So they're trying to analyze me more and check up more. But it's just like, no, this isn't the streets of Calcutta. This isn't Bangkok. It's okay. Like, I'm not like that, you know. But amongst those cultures here on Earth, it's like it's okay to lie. It's a bit more of a thing. And Western society, it's not like Western society is perfect and white people are perfect and stuff. We still have quite a high level. It's just not as high as the other countries, but it's still quite a high level of lying. And you've got judges and police and all this sort of stuff, and they're just like kind of think it's like okay to lie to get ahead and stuff. And they don't have whatever Andy has, where it's just like this staunch strictness that's just like, no, that's not okay to lie. Like, as in, because lies, lies build up and it leads to more and more problems, and then next minute you have a whole populace that are confused by lies all the time and they don't even know. See, it's okay if it's a lie that's about nothing that's important, but if it's a lie about like a court case or something and it's a public thing, then people are walking around with false data in their heads and it just ends up becoming a full-blown mindfuck. Like, you don't want to have a society and a country and a planet where lying is okay, because shit just goes off the rails. And that's what the Mission Earth book basically is, because it's just like, whoa, what's going on here on Earth? There's just too much lying, and it's acceptable to lie, and it's not okay. And so, of course, when it comes to squirreling as a problem in Scientology, of course, there's lying about squirreling, which is what's going on with the golden age of knowledge and the golden age of tech. It's lying about squirreling. It's shifties that are going on. But this problem of lying being a big thing, because it's not really taught at school. I mean, it's almost like they should teach kids at school or at Sunday school or something. It should be like, thou shalt not lie. It's just like, you know, but it's not a thing. But I was watching this crime scene investigation show, and it was about the Ivan Milat murders, and it was like some redneck guy was killing backpackers in the bush not far from Sydney, actually not far from the secret government underground bases. That's another story. So maybe some of those people that went missing weren't killed by Ivan Milat. They got abducted or some shit. But anyway, that's a whole other story, but it's just really cool when you really investigate things and you find out what's going on, and you're like, whoa, you know, there's stuff. Let's just say the military keeps stuff secret, and then they go and as time goes on, they end up achieving more and more things, and then they have a lot of things underground that are secret. Then they've got tunnels connecting to underground bases, and then just like, and the tunnels going to industrial areas, and you think that's just some area where they're moving oil or some crap, and it's just like, there's so much going on. Anyway, so with these Ivan Milat murders, the crime scene show was going over what happened with these murders, right? And what happens is you'll have a backpacker, right, that was like picked up as a hitchhiker off the side of the road, and then the backpacker would be found dead like 3 years later, right? And on this show, they were going over all these details of like the songs that were playing, what actually happened that night, like, did he smoke the cigarette and then stab the girl, or stab the girl then shoot the girl, or something like that. And guys got shot as well and killed in that. But I was watching the show and I was like, this is, because I'm, you know, I analyze things and investigate things, right? I'm like a little detective. I'm like, this is utterly ridiculous. I'm like, either the show is just full-blown making up these facts that they say are facts, or the police has made them up and the show's just reporting on what the police story is. But I was looking at the evidence and I was just like, there's no way you could know these things from the evidence that was left behind. It's just like, okay, so you find blood on the murderer guy and he's got a gun and he's known to be a nutcase, and you're like, okay, you killed those backpackers, okay? This is what happened that night. You picked them off the side of the road and then you shot them and that sort of stuff. And you go, that's what the evidence indicates and all this sort of stuff, and you go and you put the guy in jail. But you wouldn't go into all this ridiculous detail of, oh, he did this and he did that and blah, 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 and you'd be like, how do you know that? You don't know that. What are you talking about, you know? But the question is, why did the police have all these fancy details of, oh, he did this and all that sort of stuff, when they couldn't have known that, right? It's because what they do is they want to do a good job on these cases. This has fallen into the PR department because it was a public thing and it was covered by the media. And when things are in PR, suddenly it's in fake land and lying land. And you learn this in Mission Earth. Things just go into ridiculous lies once you're in PR area, right? Because they're like, oh, it's public relations. We have to do a good job. We're the police. We have to let everyone know we're doing a good job and think we're doing a good job. And I want to get a promotion off these Milat murder things, and I want to look like we're professional and we want to do a great job. The PR on Earth is just, it really pisses me off because there's so much bullshit lies. Anyway, so what happens when they do PR? Well, they have to make it look like they're doing a good job. So they go and they basically just make things up. They dub in stuff into what happened in the crime and all that sort of stuff. And so then when it goes on TV and into the media, everyone goes, oh, wow, what a fantastic job the police did. Oh, yeah, A+. A+ for that student on that project. Oh, A+, you're so good. You know what I mean? Yes, it's justified all the tax money that's spent. You guys are fantastic and you did a great job. And it's just like, no, you're freaking lying. You're making shit up. You're just adding it in there because you didn't want to do what Andy would do if he was a fucking detective. If I was a fucking detective, I would sit there and I'll go, look, there was blood, there was samples, there was blah, blah, blah. Look, you picked the girl up around like 6 o'clock or something in the evening and you fucking killed her, okay? We don't know the exact time. It wasn't 3 a.m. We don't know if she got shot at 3 a.m., okay? But we know that it happened within that 12-hour period. But that doesn't sound so fancy. It sounds like you're a bit of a dumbass because you're like, well, we don't know. It happened sometime between there. It just doesn't sound all polished and professional, but it's the fucking truth. Do you see what I mean? And so then people go, oh, Andy the detective, he just doesn't sound so polished and nice. He doesn't sound like, oh, we don't respect the police as much because look at them, he sounds like a bum and he doesn't use perfect sounding words. So what they do is they fire Andy and then they put someone else in there that uses perfect sounding words and doesn't say, I don't know. It doesn't say, well, it was between this period and that. They put in a detective that says, it was at 2 a.m. and just makes up 2 a.m. So it all looks professional and smooth. And on the surface and superficial, you analyse the Ivan Milat murders and you're like, wow, the police did a great job when you don't look into things further. But then if you look into things further, you're like, that was all bullshit. You coppers just lied about what happened. And then the cops plant evidence. So they plant like a tent or like an axe at the guy's house, right? Even though they have enough evidence to convict the guy, they plant evidence. So then it looks like so impressive. They're like, oh, we had this and we had that. And you realise that the people who are involved with this investigation of the Ivan Milat thing don't respect the truth. And then you realise the judges that are involved with it and stuff just don't respect the truth. And it's all a dog and pony show, like it's all just ridiculous and you're like, what the hell? This is just a joke. Where's the truth in this sort of stuff? It's just like, there's PR here. I know there's freaking more PR. You know, and so I was watching this crime scene show and I was like, this is so stupid watching this show because you can't know these details, right? And then there's one guy, right, who got abducted by the Ivan Milat guy and he actually didn't get killed and he ran off, right? And I was like, okay, the details of that night is fair enough. You actually had those details about he was playing this song on the radio and it happened at this time and stuff. That kind of makes sense because that guy remembered the night and he would have told all those things that happened. But with those other ones, it's just like, you're just making this shit up. You're just adding it in there so that you have great PR and it looks fantastic and professional. And then you listen to the copper on the show and they're like, well, this was a high profile thing, so we had to do something about it. And then you know how the cops actually operate, and shit that's not in the media they just ignore, but anything that's in the media they put all this attention on. And you're like, these humans don't respect the truth. They just don't have high regard for the truth. And it's just like, this is not okay. This is a big outpoint. This is a big problem here on Earth that judges, it's in particular, it's the whole court system in particular, because there's a lot of talk about that in Mission Earth, where Hubbard's just so correct. He shows things in Mission Earth in a comical, ridiculous manner, but you're like, okay, it's just a little bit exaggerated, but sadly it's only a little bit exaggerated. He's pretty much right. Like, this is actually what happens here on Earth. Like, it's a freaking joke. Like, it's just a joke. You're sitting there and you're like, what the hell? And stuff. Like, in Mission Earth, it talks about police planting evidence at scenes and stuff, and then it shows a copper like chasing after a case because the copper knows it's in the media, so he wants to get the PR, the good PR and the promotion and whatever bonus he's going to get. And you realise it's all ridiculous. But the main thing is that here on Earth, remember that lying is a problem. That's a big outpoint. So when it comes to squirreling, this is what I'm trying to say. When it comes to squirreling, don't expect the squirreling's going to be admitted to. Don't expect that somebody's going to squirrel and be like, yeah, I'm squirreling. That's not going to happen. You're not going to have a sign, I'm doing squirreling. You know, it's going to be some sort of shifty thing where they're going to be making out they're not squirreling, but they actually are squirreling. That's the problem with Earthlings. And that's what's going on with the church and RTC and the golden age of tech. It's lies, right? But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because people will read an article in the paper like about a court case or something like that, and they won't realise that, one, the media who are reporting on it just put lies in there, but number two, they might actually be trying to tell the truth, the media, but they're reporting on what the judges and the prosecution and the lawyers and all that sort of stuff, they report on what they say. And those people are just blatantly lying about things because they've got PR going on and all that sort of stuff. They don't care about the truth. It's just like, years ago, right, I know I'm going off topic, we need to have all this background data to understand all this stuff. Years ago, right, I was with some friends and one of them was all hot-headed and stuff and wanted to get into a fight or something like that. And there was other people that wanted to get into a fight, and we went somewhere and there was a fight, and some people pulled out some garden stakes, like some weapons pretty much, and so one of the guys, the hot-headed guy, ended up getting hit with the weapon, right? And so then he went to the police. So the people who pulled out the weapon got into trouble, right? And so somehow the police got my number and were like, they wanted to find out about what happened that night. So I went to the police station, I sat down with the copper, and he said to me, he was like, you know, oh, we want to know about what happened that night, blah, blah, blah. And he was typing it up for the court case, right? And then I was telling him the truth, right? And he was like, well, we'll just say blah, 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 and we'll do blah, blah, blah. And he was neatening up the court case so that it was easier for the judge and that sort of stuff. But what struck me was like, oh, hold on a second. I thought I was in a place where, like, you're supposed to tell the truth and stuff. Like, what? Like I was just sort of like, oh, well, so this is how things really work. People go to the police with stuff, and then it just gets typed up, like, as with lies and stuff, and then it goes to court, and then they're dealing with a fictitious story of what actually happened in the courtroom. And this is how things operate. But this was like a little microcosm, because this was just a small little case of somebody, I guess they got charged with assault with a deadly weapon because they hit someone with a pole. right? And there was it sort of almost made sense. Like the guy was like, "Oh, we'll just neaten things up." But I realized, oh, okay, so I guess it's kind of okay him twisting the truth a bit. But then it just that's just the beginning. But then it goes deeper, and when there's bigger cases, and then you end up having a whole case that can be just like full of bullshit and fictition and stuff, and the judges will never sit down and admit it. But behind closed doors, you go and I imagine you'll talk to a judge and you go, "Hey, you know that like that whole case you were talking about was just full of bullshit." And the judge will say, "Yeah, that was just all bullshit." And you're like, "This is just bizarro land. Like it's just so ridiculous. The lies and all this stuff." Like when this guy in Melbourne killed this Eurydice girl last year, of course the court case doesn't bring up the psych drugs that he was on. It doesn't bring up how he mixed alcohol with the psych drugs, right? It doesn't bring up how vaccines probably caused his autism when he was 3 years old or something like that. You know. And then you hear how they were saying how he was into rape porn and snuff films or whatever. And they make out that that was the cause of what led him to do it, and the judge goes along with it as well. And then I just know how the whole system doesn't respect the truth, and it doesn't base itself on truth. So you literally, when they do a crime scene TV show on this case and what happened, you know you're hearing fiction. And then you hear about the Ivan Milat thing, and you just know it's just fiction. You're dealing in fiction, you know, and it's just like, this is just so ridiculous. You're reading the paper and you're just like, this is fiction, you know? Like, as in, if Andy had a paper, it would be like, there's some rumour that, like, this happened, but we can't really confirm it. And so we know something happened, like, last night, but that's not good PR. So what the paper says is, at 2 a.m. last night, this happened, and 33 people died. And we know it was done by blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, this is just lies. You don't know that. You haven't done the investigation. You can't afford the resources to do the time and all that sort of stuff to do the investigation. But it doesn't look good PR. They're like, but it's not professional enough. And it's just like, but be honest. It's what honesty that's what matters, you know. But, you know, when you hear the news and all this sort of this crazy Western shit that we're going on, this Western world that we're in, it's just so much PR, and that's why it's so good reading Mission Earth. Because you understand the PRness and the fictitionness, the bullshit of it, and just the fake news of it all and stuff, and you realise it's all just a joke, you know. But these poor people who don't have the time to investigate and who are too busy paying their bills working 9 to 5, just these poor masses living in this Western world, the wogs, they don't know about this, so they actually think that the information they're hearing is accurate. You know, they don't, like, they actually read an article and think that that's true and stuff, and it's just like they're getting conned. They're in this crazy system of lies, just like the church members who are in this con that the golden age of tech is good. You know, Joe Blow down the street reads an article about some person or something, or some stripper or something, and they read the article and they don't realize that it's full of all these lies and it's just fake news, right? Just the same as the church member sees Golden Age of Tech 2 and thinks it's great and thinks that the tech's been corrected and been improved, right? It's the same thing. The people who are running these things are just freaking lying. It's just not got any truth. So here, let's listen to this. I've been going off topic too much, but anyway. It needs to happen. People need to understand that Earth doesn't have a high priority for the truth. The people that make up the population here on Earth do not have a high priority for the truth. So that's why Scientology is so interesting. That's why this podcast is so interesting, because you've got someone who's actually saying the truth, right? You wouldn't have a truther movement. You wouldn't have Alex Jones if everyone just knew the truth. You wouldn't need to say, no, actually Hitler survived World War II. You wouldn't need to say, no, it's quite possible the moon's made of metal and stuff. And he's like, this was towed here and stuff. You know, it's like, you wouldn't need someone to say, no, like, that probe sent to Mars was actually shot down by a UFO. You know, you wouldn't need to say, hey, there's actually like reptilian aliens working under Area 51. You know what I mean? Because it would just be normal. People would be like, yeah, back in 1952, and you'll learn in a history class, we made contact with some reptilian race and they sent some scientists here and it was called Project Serpo or something like that. And that was like, that's how things are. And people wouldn't be like, whoa. Like, people wouldn't need to make YouTube videos talking about this sort of out there stuff because everyone would just know about it. But here on Earth, where no one respects the truth, right? Where not many people respect the truth, and it goes on for years and years and years, all this crazy shit goes down and you have to, like, go into rabbit holes of finding out what's actually going on. Anyway, it makes the game wild and fun because the Monopoly game's got deception added to it. The game of life has deception, so it's like, oh, now things are shifty. Now things are interesting and deep. So here, let's find out about the truth about the golden age of tech and what it actually is and how it isn't what the church says it is. By John Nunes, The Golden Age of Tech, the miscavige wrong why that further sank the Church of Scientology. Wrong why, that's it. Wrong why. They say wrong whys all the time. The wrong why of why the guy murdered the person. They say a wrong why. The wrong why of like vaccine of psych drugs. They say wrong whys or whatever all the time, instead of saying the why was the psych drug side effect. It's just wrong whys all around. Just wrong whys, wrong right, wrong right. It's just everywhere. Anyway, I'll stop. I swear to God, I'll promise, and I'll actually read this out. Unless something particularly I have to comment on. Okay. The evolution that created the golden age of tech starts a few years before its release. I was an outer org trainee at FLAG during the entire period. I will give some insider details on what was happening. In 1993, FLAG Service Org had a big out-tech fiasco that was a typical example of David Miscavige being overworked and the only one who can handle things. Reportedly, at a meeting in the CMO Int conference room with DM and many CMOI execs, after... Sorry, I got distracted, but... I mean, it's probably something I need to clear, but... There's just, people just don't know what's going on. For example, I've investigated allergies and one of the courses, like why the hell us earthlings have allergies to tree pollen and that sort of crap, right? And do you know what's very strong reason as to what caused allergies? The use of petroleum and stuff. Like, it wasn't a thing in the 1700s. It came as the factories came and the use of petrol in cars and all that sort of shit rose up. The allergies rose up, right? Because the petroleum... Because I know this because I've got a problem with this in my body. It fucks up the proteins in the body and the DNA and shit. And that DNA gets passed on to children as well. So it's cumulative, right? But it stuffs up the body's ability to detox and to handle pollen in the air and stuff. And it just wrecks, it stuffs up the body, right? So, I mean, that to me is just normal data. It's just like, yeah, allergies are a new phenomenon and it was created by frickin' oil, basically, right? But that's not known. That's not like taught at school. But people should know this. This is important. People should, but it's probably been covered up by the oil companies and Rockefeller or whatever, who didn't want people to know that oil had some bad side effects. They wanted to have PR and make everyone think, oh, oil's fantastic. Oh, yeah, it's great. It works cars well and it's better than electric cars. And no, oil's good and it doesn't harm people or anything. And it's just like, yeah, it causes problems. But it's just like, there's so many wrong whys and the level of knowledge. Because of the lies, right, it confuses everyone and people just give up. But Scientologists are willing to fight through that and go, no, we're finding the truth, right? Even though we have to investigate for ages, but we're going to find out the truth about things. But people just give up because they go, oh my God, there's so many lies and all this sort of stuff. So whenever there's lies, it connects with people just having a lack of data about knowledge about things. So people don't know about the truth source of allergies and stuff like that. Anyway. In 1993, Flag Service Org, FSO, had a big outtake. I'm sorry, I won't cut in. I swear to God, I promise, okay? In 1993, Flag Service Org, FSO, had a big outtake fiasco that was a typical example of David Miscavige, DM, being overworked and the only one who can handle things. Reportedly at a meeting in the CMO Int conference room with DM and many CMO Int execs. After DM returned to the base from the FSO where he had been for several weeks, at the beginning of the meeting he turned to Ray Midoff and said something like, "Ray, I could knock you right through the wall." The implication was that the out-tech that DM had found at the FSO was appalling and Ray, as Inspector Guardian of Tech, should have handled it or not let it get that way. I was at the Flag Service Org when the fiasco was happening. John Eastman arrived from INT and took over the Senior CS FSO post. Interrogatories went out to all tech terminals and trainees. OW write-ups were ordered and knowledge reports were demanded on any out ethics known about. It was martial law. This to me seems like he's explaining the wrong handling to an out point. And because David Miscavige was handling the out point, so of course he comes to a wrong line, a wrong handling and all that sort of stuff. And so it just leads to all this stupid behaviour. Alright, DM then ordered everybody onto Pro TRs. This was ridiculous and it didn't matter if you were doing just fine as an auditor or had PCs interested and willing to talk to you, etc. or not. It was just a big generality that nobody had their TRs in and had to redo the course. Sounds like a wrong handling. Then, a course that should take 2 weeks, Pro TRs, took a year to complete, with all tech staff and trainees struggling to get a video passed. Videos would have to go through Paul Schobel and then up to the RTC rep Sue Wilhere or Angie Trent and then up to DM for final pass. This line was slower than an injustice appeal line. Weeks and weeks would, and that's saying something, weeks and weeks would go by only to come back, your TRs are robotic. This is when, this made the auditors become robotic. Like, this is what's crazy about it. When you increase the security and you make it really hard for an auditor to pass, instead of the auditor just sitting there and being cool and auditing someone, they suddenly don't want to make any mistakes. I'm being perfect. I've got perfect TRs. Like, it's just crazy. People were broken on that course. It was suppressively run. Surprise. DM was looking in on sessions with the look-in system at the Fort Harrison at that time, and he found flagrant mismetering, namely FNs that didn't exist were being called. I'm not talking about 1 or 2 sweeps being called an FN. People were calling dirty needles FNs. DM would confront these auditors as soon as they came out of session with ferocity and throw water on them and tell them they are dry, saying that was what it felt like to be told your needle is floating when it isn't. He was furious. DM's such a character. Tech staff were woken up in the middle of the night and bussed down to the internship to drill metering. A whole fiasco and utter confusion occurred on the entire base. A tech meeting was called, and when asked if anyone knew for sure what an FN was, no one raised their hand. Everyone was confused because now DM was enforcing a whole new standard of what an FN is. A whole parade of red tags followed, and not only that, they weren't coming off with subsequent sessions. This is how the FN got fucked in the church, which was a big thing. It was tied up with the golden age of Tech 1. It was just, I couldn't think of a way to stuff up Scientology more than to stuff up an FN, because it's a huge part of Scientology. For the first time in flag history, sessions were going unrepaired over 24 hours because the PC wouldn't FN at the examiner after the sessions. Some of these PCs were going a week red tagged, and flag was losing its stats each day for the entire HGC as a result. So Dave Miscavige has really been diving in there, meddling with things and fucking them up. But no, as a church member, you just see the PR of it. You just see all the other extra data left out, and a smooth professional suit and a clear talking person that doesn't use swear words, doesn't have pauses where he goes, like someone who's like me, who's real, who's genuinely trying to remember something. Just professional, smooth, and they go, oh, he must be trustworthy. Look how good and smooth he is. He's so Madison Avenue, you know, with that fancy suit and nice haircut. He must be trustworthy. And it's just like, no, all those extra things make you wonder, what's that person trying to hide? It's just what Obama did. He was just professional, smooth-speaking lawyer. It's disgusting. Right. So, where were we up to? Unusual solutions got implemented to interview the PC and try to get an FN. Then other actions got put in, like searching interviews for any psych background or suicidal thoughts, etc., and finding that they were illegal PCs or non-flag public and having them routed off, still red tagged, but it would be off the books this way and stats could be counted. This is just a classic wrong why. Like a whole data evaluators course. This is like an example LRH would use about some idiot from some random org. And he would say, this is what happened. This was a wrong why, as an example, right? But one of these idiots has gotten in control of Scientology and he's running the thing. And so this is what happens. It's just like, yeah. This was a period of total chaos on tech lines. DM was RPFing or declaring class 12s left and right. Comevs were flying. Doubt conditions were assigned for any miscalled FN, even if it was an accident. Suddenly, the job of auditing had become a dangerous job. Cramming was basically dropped as a tool during this period. If you flubbed, you did ethics and drilling. Even after the lineup was fully released, there was no cramming for a long time. It was instead decided that everybody fell under this Y of insufficient drilling to attain perfection, and so were just put on the courses or made to redo drills. Cramming technology became utterly lost, to say nothing of key to life and life orientation courses, or primary rundowns after it as part of training programs. So taking it back to where I left off, red tags were occurring more often than not. The post of examiner went from the easiest post to hold to the most dangerous. People were booted off that post on a daily basis, and the people who could smile the best and the best looking, who wouldn't flub the calling of an FN, were searched for. It's just so ridiculous. I mean, this is the problem I was running into in the church, where I wasn't really FNing easily, and it probably was because of other things like the regging and the shit tech and that sort of stuff. But actually, no, it probably, yeah, but the FN was messed with, right? And so, because I would see the auditors looking at the meter, counting the thing I was going across, and I'd probably be thinking, this is so stupid, I don't need to run this action for much longer, like, but why won't I FN, you know what I mean? And it's just like, you can see that the auditor's like, okay, we need, like, you can tell the auditor is like we should be moving on to something else, but it's just like he can't because he's got to count the needle going up and back, and it just causes confusion. The penny really dropped for me when I was in the church, and it was probably my last year in the church, and I saw the quoll, the head of quoll, and like a trained soup arguing over an FN, like not a bad argument, but just arguing over an FN, and watching it because I had the machine that can replay what happened on the meter, and they were watching it again, and they watched it again, and they watched it again, and one was saying it was FN, and the other one was saying it was not. And I was like, oh my God, you're telling me it's that hard to spot an FN? Like, I was thinking, if you guys, you train people, you can't even spot an FN and you're watching the replay over and over again, right? Then what the hell happens in session when you're asking questions, talking to the person, and you're writing things down, like, and you can't just rewatch something again, rewatch it again? You could be missing all these FNs. And I was just like, whoa, there's something wrong. There's something big time wrong. And now I know the definition FN has been fucked with, and that's why they were debating over what an FM was. And the quoll guy, the head of quoll, ended up being wrong. Well, that's I don't really know, but that's apparently what it was, because the Taiwanese guy who was a soup, he was like, he was like, no, it's an FN, and then the quoll guy eventually was like, yeah, it's an FN or something. And so the quoll guy who's supposed to be smarter got it wrong. But I don't think he was a dumbass or anything. I think it's just that the FN thing had been messed with and screwed with, and he'd trained at flag and all this sort of stuff, and it's just like, whoa, this is crazy. This is just crazy. You can't mess with the definition of an FN. And I had such an easy time when I was involved, when I got audited by Ronzorg, because it doesn't have this retarded definition of an FN where you're sitting there and you're like you have these moments, I'm sure all church members know what I'm talking about, where you're in session and you're like, why can't I FN yet? Or like, can't we move on? Or you're thinking this is sort of a waste of time. And so, and you see the auditor looking and counting and stuff, and you're just like, these are reasons why you don't get the wins that you're supposed to get, because you're wasting time doing all this stupid shit and overrunning things and stuff, and you're like, this is retarded. Anyway, I'll continue. Young pretty girls had the most success, and so were used for the most part. Every exam was... That's so ridiculous. Oh my God. Look, it sounds ridiculous, but I know how things are here on Earth, and I can believe that this is what would happen. Like, they would notice that the young pretty girls would get the FNs more, so they would just leave them there, and nobody would say, hold on a second, this is ridiculous, because then you'd have to take on the whole Scientology hierarchy system and say, why is there a problem with FNs and stuff? And so people avoid that, and so they just run along with this silliness. Anyway, every exam was videoed and watched by top brass, who were no longer doing their post duties but stuck in front of a TV monitor watching FNs at the examiner all day long. Numerous terminals would look at the same exam when there was a dispute if the needle really did float. Auditors who thought their PC FN'd would find out later that no, it didn't, and they had to take the PC back in session right away. PCs were in an uproar. Wins were getting invalidated by this whole process, yet it was all assumed it was because of their prior bad auditing to no FN. Earlier that was making so much trouble now. The word of DM could not be questioned. It became law, and we were subject to the new standard of what an FN was. A present time problem would come up, such as needing to call your spouse then in order to get an FN, since the needle only swept around a couple of times, despite the PC feeling ready to get on with the rest of the session. One would have to, and here's the problem when you go into these sessions and stuff. When you have one instance of getting screwed over and pissed off, right, it hangs with the rest of your intensive. Because you're like, oh, I've had a trip to Flag and my first day I was screwed over and I wasted a whole day. And it's just like, it's not easy to forget that and just be happy with the rest of your week in FN all the time. You're sort of pissed off by it the whole time through. And then whenever anything happens, it's a little version of that, you're pissed off again, and then it makes it harder to FN again. And it has this accumulative effect, and you just keep on going along pissed off and not FNing. So anyway. It's not like you piss off someone one day, the next day they get a good win, and then on the third day they're just going to FN all easy, like they forgot about what happened 2 days before. It's just like things work on chains, and you remember things. You know, it's like you can have a holiday and have all this shit stuff up, and then you can find a cool watch, and then you go on the aeroplane, you go back home, and they're like, how was your holiday? And it's not like you'll be like, fantastic, I found a watch on the side of the road. You'll be like, hey, it was cool, I found a watch, but I'm pissed off because I wasted all this time on this holiday. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's kind of like that. Anyway. A present time problem, one would have to ask for an earlier similar problem, ending up going into past lives all the way back to the Ark and beyond. And yeah, this would mean flying. This is what was me. It was flying roods just all the time, and it was so stupid. Huge amounts of session time. Keep in mind how much it cost, up to $1,000 an hour, were tied up in just trying to handle this present time problem. PCs would then red tag and things snowballed. A tremendous amount of wasted time and unnecessary repair occurred, and PCs would introvert about why they are having so much trouble. The PC frequently blames himself, and so he goes, oh, I must be like an SP, and oh, I didn't pay that speeding fine, and there's a suppressive government that's controlling us and putting cameras everywhere and revenue raising by like getting $300 off everyone once a year or whatever because of these speeding fines, and I refuse to go along with that, and I must be like, oh, I must be an SP because I didn't pay that speeding fine because it's against the law, even though it's technically, if you actually analyze it, it's not really against the law itself, or whatever they wrote is actually, they're actually against the law, and it depends on if you're a lawyer and you can analyze all the paperwork and you argue maybe it's not against the law, and like, it's just like, it's not really against the law, but maybe it kind of is against the law. Like on that, what's that thing? The way to happiness. Yeah, it's kind of against the law, and like so. Oh, maybe I'm full of overheads because I refuse to pay a speeding fine, and it's just like it's so ridiculous. It's just like this is what happens, and then you got a Scientologist that walks around, right, and he's just like worried about committing overheads all the time. And he's like, oh, I watched porn. Oh my God, I watched porn. And oh, that's why I didn't get wins on the process or something like that. And it's porn. It's just like, no. Your whole sense of ethics has been thrown out the window. I'll tell you what an actual overt is. It's a freaking lawyer directly lying to a judge. That is an overt, okay? I'll tell you what an overt is. It's like raping a 5-year-old. That is an overt. I'll tell you what an overt is. It's like you're working in someone's house and you see $50 and you take it. That's an overt. It's not driving along the street, not paying attention to your speedo and happening to go 10 Ks over and then getting a speeding ticket, then refusing to pay it or whatever. It's like, that's not an overt. It's not someone watching porn, you know what I mean? It's like, it screws everything up and stuff. And then you got all these church members that are like thinking that they're committing overheads, and their whole sense of ethics goes through the roof. And then they have a disagreement with the church, right? And they want to voice it and they want to tell people, and they're like, oh, maybe I'm like just being negative and one-wanting and like, like the person just wants to bring up what's wrong so it can be fixed, but they're like, no, I must be committing overheads by talking about that bad stuff all the time. Like I remember when I was in the church, it was like, there wasn't many overts and stuff, and so and they'll continually ask, is there a miss withhold or whatever? Is there a miss withhold because of this FN problem? Is there a miss withhold? And you're just like, what the fuck? Like, I'm not FNing because I'm pissed off that you keep on asking me for a withhold. You know what I mean? Anyway, this is why it's so confusing, because it's like this screwing up the definition of FN legitimately does stop people from FNing. So there were times when I was involved with the church when I was FNing and they weren't recognizing it, right? But also, there was heaps of times when I was not FNing, and I was not FNing because they'd stuffed up the definition of FN, and I really wasn't FNing. But it was because they were stuffed up the definition of FN. So it's all just craziness. Anyway, I can't remember what I was going to say. But this ethics thing, you know, you got someone who... next minute they're just walking around like worried. It's like they're looking for overts that they've done, and it's just like, no, it's just like you don't understand what ethics is. And I notice it amongst the people here in Melbourne, right? Because we don't really have gangsters, because we don't really have a dangerous society, the police and the government and the control system that we've got set up here makes people think they're committing overts. And it's a similar thing that happens in the church. These church members, these good Scientologists, actually really have quite a high ethic level, and they don't commit overts, right? Because you don't have a freaking child rapist in ethics department getting handled, because you don't have a murderer in ethics department being handled, because you don't have a criminal lawyer in ethics being handled, right? The ethics and the group in general have a whole different idea of what an overt is, and they start picking on little small things like someone watching porn. And they're like, oh, there's something like and it just messes with the whole ethics level, right? And so there's similar things happening in Melbourne where it's like, there's not as much crime as other places, right? So people have a sort of different idea of what's illegal. And in America, where you have gangsters and stuff in these ghettos, it's just like, it's cool because you're like, oh, good. So the average citizens that are actually good get left alone because the police are busy running after shootings and running after crack dealers and stuff and running after domestics in those black areas and stuff. And it's just like, this is great because they're leaving the normal citizens alone. This is good. And you watch the Cops TV show in America and you're like, whoa, this is wild. They're actually catching bad guys. They're actually going and chasing after, like, you're like, this is actual crime. And then you watch the cop shows in Australia, and what do? You see a cop go and pick on someone who went 10 Ks above the speed limit. And they're arguing about 10 Ks above the speed limit. And then you see a cop go and there's a problem with a cat up a tree. And you're like, this is what cops is like in Australia? You're like, this is a joke. Americans, if you get a chance, sit down and actually watch the cops show, right? From Australia. It's probably not called the same thing, but watch this similar type of show, right? And you'll go, oh, wow, these cops are actually busy, like, finding things that are going on that are naughty that, like, aren't even actually naughty. And you're like, whoa, what a batshit crazy society. And then you're like, oh, it's kind of like the church where you got high ethical level people, and so then ethics start picking fault with things that aren't even really necessary to be handled in ethics and aren't overts. It's just interesting, but it's just like, it's actually kind of good when, it's actually really kind of good that you got ghettos and stuff, because it keeps people sane and it keeps people aware of what overts actually are and what bad behavior actually is. You know? Anyway, huge amounts of session time. Keep in mind how much it cost up to, oh, I think I already read that. All this from the DM insertion of the huge arbitrary on what an FN is. This resulted in the huge amounts of drilling to attain perfection, which is the golden age of tech. See, you can tell this guy's smart, I mean, he might be exaggerating a little bit, but it's pretty much, I bet you this is what happened, right? And so you can see how smart, how he manages to define what the golden age of Tech 1 is. It's just huge amount of drilling to attain perfection. I mean, he just summarized it up there, and it stuffed up the training courses and all this sort of stuff because people couldn't pass because they were just drilling so much. They were spending ages on pro-TRs and they were just spending ages and ages, and it stuffed up the creation of auditors. A probably even more accurate name would be the golden age of squirreling, and also the golden age of of killing auditors, or just, of just the golden age of destroying Scientology's ability to create auditors. Anyway, but you can tell this guy's smart because he has that ability to just see what's going on and then summarize it in that little line, to attain perfection, which is the golden age of tech. Huge amounts of drilling to attain perfection. That's the golden age of tech. It's like, oh, great. And that's what LIH would do with a lot of stuff. He would just look at things in life and then he would summarize it into like a little short sentence, and you'd be like, oh, that's what's going on, Anyway. Auditors didn't know what to do when these FNs wouldn't occur, and the PC had no more answers. So all sorts of buttons were checked on the earlier similar question, which just drove a PC into frustration. Oh my God. This sort of stuff would happen to me. I mean, they would be putting in buttons like there's no tomorrow. They'll be like, was it suppressed? Was it blah, blah, blah? Was it blah, 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 blah? And it's just like, no, I'm probably not FNing because you changed the definition of FN, because you asked me to do a sec check after I'd done grade 2 and I'd done the grades and I'd been saying overts the whole time, right? Overts, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, not really overts. And you're wasting my time on this trip and all this sort of stuff. And so you're just putting in more buttons, and it's just like, this is so annoying. Anyway. It just drives the PC into frustration. PCs were requesting auditor switches all the time. As I mentioned, cramming became non-existent on the flubs. There were too many. Instead, you did your doubt and liability condition and drilled. Drilled all night. Since nobody had drilled this shit before of checking buttons. Also, I'm going to give another credit to the use of the word shit here. That's a lack of PR, and that's a good sign. Like I was saying earlier with the whole PR thing. So if you're analysing this document and you're thinking, is this guy just lying about the golden age of tech, or is he just aberrated and he just can't see reality and this just isn't the golden age of tech? Like, you're fact checking this thing that I'm reading. I think that use of shit is a good use, because it gives an idea that he's down to earth. He doesn't care what people think of him. He's not trying to act professional, And so it's a good sign. And you'll notice if you're around someone who drops fancy words, but it's like a fake use of the fancy words, beware, because you've got a 1-1. And so it's what lawyers do all the time. Like, and salesmen do and stuff. And lawyers and salesmen are very 1-1 professions. They drop fancy words. His use of word shit is the opposite of dropping fancy words. And so it's kind of a good sign. But when they drop fancy words, it's just like, ooh. And that's what Miscavige does in his speeches as well. He'll drop fancy words that are just like not necessary. And it literally puts his events, David Miscavige's events, because you don't have time to follow along and look up all the words. He literally puts people into MU phenomena while they're watching the events by pulling out this huge vocabulary, right? He chooses all the hardest words that LIH uses, right? But he uses them in speeches, and LIH legitimately uses them because that's the words that he just uses, right? But he would use them probably in the not quite the right way, and he would use them probably too much, but he uses them in the events, and the people are sitting there, right, the church members, and they literally go into MU phenomena of, and they go, oh, and you just think, you dub in, you be reasonable, and you think, oh, it must make sense, or he must be right and stuff, or he must be smart, and you're actually in MU phenomena, right? Whereas if his speeches, right, if he used down-to-earth language, right, his speeches would not seem as fancy, and you would actually be able to, while you're watching a Golden Age of Tech 2 event or something like that, you would actually be able to go, you'd actually be able to follow along, and you remain in PT, and you wouldn't go into non-comprehension and the whole fuzziness that comes with MUs, and you'd go, oh, okay, so they would, and you go, well, why did we change that grade 2 or something like that? Or why did we change grade 3? Like, you'll be there, switched on, awake and aware, and you'd probably spot the outpoints. and you wouldn't get bamboozled by bullshit. But when you're listening to Miscavige at these these events, just any of his events, he's bamboozling you with bullshit like the way that salesmen do and lawyers do by using fancy words, and it tricks you, and you literally go into, oh, you know, he must be really smart. Wow. And I was like that. I was sitting there in the events for the first 5 years. When I was involved with the church, I was like, wow, this guy's so OT. He's so smart. Like I was impressed. I thought he's real gung-ho. L. Ron Hubbard must have noticed him when he was 20 years old and thought, this guy's fantastic. I'm giving him the church and stuff. And I was just like, I was literally in that whole non-comprehension fuzz because he was using all these words that I just didn't know, you know. And so, anyway, it's just interesting. Since nobody had drilled this shit before of checking buttons and following up on meter reads during PC answers, it was the blind leading the blind. So we got these scripts given to us to drill word for word, line by line. This led to all the binders and packs of the golden age of tech. Oh my God, this is a creation of that whole robotic thing of the auditor. Like when they get... Scientology isn't supposed to be about memorizing, it's supposed to be understanding, but it's switched with golden age of tech because suddenly people were having to do patter drills and stuff and having to memorize things and be like this is almost where the brainwashing comes in and stuff. But like they have to say the buttons and they'll go, is it suppressed? Is it blah blah blah? Is it blah blah blah? Is it blah blah blah? And it'll just be like, it's just messing with the person's mind and stuff. But this is creating shit robotic auditors. Actually, I reckon the golden age of tech is a golden age of creating shit robotic auditors that aren't real people, that aren't just there, you know, just as a friend talking, but asking you the questions and just sort of checking the meter a bit to guide them. That cool casual thing. It's like just making a robot, you know. People saying I understand when they don't understand the person at all. That's bullshit, fake, and that should get knocked out. Auditors should not say I understand if they don't understand the person. Now if the person is really gone in the head and they just constantly say shit that you can't understand, then maybe you should say I understand. But PCs can tell when you say I understand and you don't actually understand them. It's fake. Just actually be real. Be like, all right, or be like, what? I don't quite get that, or something like that. Trust me, that'll get a PC winning and FNing when they realize that they're actually sitting there with a person and they're actually fucking talking to a person, not a robot. Anyway. Concerning FNs, the amount of anxiety regarding calling FNs could be sliced with a knife. The rules were, miscall an FN, you are automatically assigned doubt. No exceptions. Second time you miscall an FN, you receive a COMEV. Third time you miscall an FN, you are RPF'd/declared. Now imagine having a winning PC in front of you, bright and shiny from a nice cognition. This is the dirty truth behind the golden age of tech and how it was created, because all this crap and Miscavige trying to handle a flap and coming up with the wrong Y and all this crap, and then and going, oh, we need to make people re-drill this stuff, and then they were going, oh, now we need to make it into an official release for all the orgs around the world. This is the truth. Anyway. Now imagine having a winning PC in front of you, bright and shiny from a nice cognition, moving her body around excitedly and disrupting the needle flow, but you being able to catch the unique float of the needle long enough to know she was FNing, indicating it to her, and then being given justice action for it as per above scale. Just, yeah. It's just like you're ordering someone and you're just using the media as a bit of advice. But if you see someone, they've had a big cognition, they're FNing, right? You can see it in them. The meter doesn't quite show it. It's just like, it's an FN. Do you know what I mean? Like the meter's just assisting the person who's doing the talking therapy, basically. It's just a little assisting thing. Whereas golden age of tech meant that everything suddenly becomes the meter. And the meter becomes super important in Scientology. When Scientology was more like, some people were doing it in the 50s, where they were just ordering people without the meter, because you can do it without the meter. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, instead of the meter being something that assists the therapy, it's like the meter is the key important thing in this therapy. It's everything. That's what the golden age of tech is. Anyway. All right, so as these new scripts were coming out, this is before the actual golden age of tech release, giving all these wild... All right, so as these new scripts were coming out, this is before the actual golden age of tech release, giving all these wild scenarios requiring over an hour of roods with endless button checking and unlikely things like the PC blowing the session. DM threw a huge monkey wrench into the training lineup by adding the metering course. When we did it back then, it was called the Flag Metering Program, and it was a total pilot with new shit being thrown in now and then while on the course. We had to M9 word clear every book and issue that talks about the e-meter 5 times. We had to Method 9 word clear every book and issue that talks about the e-meter 5 times. That's crazy. This was insane, yet we did it. Then we did every e-meter drill 5 times, including reaching and withdrawing from the e-meter for 2 straight hours and confronting the e-meter for another 2 straight hours. 5 times. Then we had to pass an assessment video which was much trickier than the video pass required today. Then we had to pass an assessment video which was much trickier than the video pass required today. Okay, so maybe they've backed off a bit these days. Every item on the list had to be called off, not just 10 or so like today. Myself and many others spent over a year on that frickin' course. 13 hours a day. A lot of outer all trainees could not get through this course and were sent home all blue. The added time... Sorry, about this public relations thing. I know it's totally off topic, but it's such a key thing when you understand things, because you understand how the golden age of tech was presented, because it was presented with public relations. Okay, public relations is basically making someone else think good of you or think good of your product. And it doesn't involve the truth. Good public relations should involve the truth. Like, it should say, hey, here's the iPhone, it does this, it's a good product, there's 1 or 2 things wrong with it, but yeah, this is what it is. But what public relations is, this has 10,000 accuracy e-meter reading. This is a course that you're going to complete in 1 week. Right? When the truth is that the course takes, like, most people a month, and then there are people who don't even ever complete it because they can't complete it, like, because it's too hard for them to complete. So that's what David Miscavige will do. Like, just think of it like that example. Like, he will say, because he did it with the Golden Age of Tech 2 again, he goes, students are completing the student hat in 2 weeks, yeah. And so people watching it will be getting the PR, and the PR of the student hat in the Golden Age of Tech 2 is that it's fantastic, students are completing it in 2 weeks. But that is just a lie. It's just not true, okay? That is PR. And when you read the Mission Earth books, right, I don't know what it is why I understand PR a lot. I know that it's like, I listen to the audio books of Mission Earth, right? I'm only reading the Mission Earth book now once, because it's 10 books, it's so long. But I listened to the audio book 3 times, right? And also I was involved with television, and television is all PR and bullshit, all right? So like the way they present products and stuff to sell them and things, it's just PR, right? So I've got a good understanding of how PR works, and it's a really important thing. And I watched this documentary that you've all got to watch, and it's called The Century of Self. I think it's called. I'm going to put that in the comment section of this video. That is so important to understand the book Mission Earth and to just understand Western society, because what it is it tells of how PR was created and how suddenly advertising became shifty. And instead of saying, hey, buy my tea, I have nice tea, it's good, you should buy it, it became manipulative and shifty. And this huge 1-1, right, who I think Hubbard based the Madison character, the J. Wobbler Madison in the Mission Earth books, they based him off this Bernays guy, right? When you watch The Century of Self, you're like, oh, I get it now. I get PR. Like the penny really drops. It's such a good documentary. It's actually been rated one of the best documentaries of all time or something. I don't know how long it goes. I think it goes for 3 hours, but it is like the best 3 hours. But it really hits nail on the head, and you go, oh, I get PR. And then stuff like what David Miscavige does and the release of these golden age of text and the golden age of knowledge and stuff, you don't buy the bullshit because you can see the advertising, you can see the PRness of it. You can see how it doesn't care about the truth. It cares about fucking brainwashing you and making you think you need to go buy a Mercedes, or you need to buy a t-shirt to feel confident and strong, and you need to buy a car with a big stick because it makes you feel like you're a big dick. You know what I mean? And this is the sort of stuff that they do, literally. Like, and so I'm putting that in the comments section. Hopefully I remember at the end of this. I'll write it down. So in order to understand how things go so batshit crazy here on Earth, you've got to understand public relations. It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing in Mission Earth, because you get how all these things get twisted and things go silly because it's just PR. And it was invented by a 1-1, of course, because they're fake. And it's basically a 1-1 popularizing the idea of lying and encouraging corporations and governments and people to use lying in order to promote themselves and get themselves ahead. And it causes all these problems. Anyway, so the reason why you don't know this truth about the golden age of tech is because of PR, because the whole thing is done by PR people. Anyway, myself and many others spent over a year on that frickin' course. 13 hours a day. A lot of out-of-org trainees could not get through this course and were sent home or blue. The added time it took to get through this course was always blamed on the trainees themselves. No outpoints were looked for, like why someone would have to M9 something 5 times if he M9'd it correctly the first time, or why somebody would have to reach and withdraw from something for 2 hours, then do it again 4 more times. This is just for starters. Alright, that's it. I've realised I've gone too far. I'm actually just going to read this out and say no comment at all. DM changed the drill instructions for the drills on finding a hidden date on the e-meter, and as a result, nobody could pass that damn drill. DM changed the drill instructions for the drills on finding a hidden date on the e-meter, and as a result, nobody could pass that damn drill. I remember hearing about this. It took weeks and months when I was involved with the church. It took weeks and months in some cases. And by the way, it doesn't get labelled as DM made this mistake. It gets blamed on people who did editing thingos. It gets blamed on these editing things, all these mysterious SPs that were around in the 80s or something like that. It doesn't, people don't find who really caused these problems. Students were faking passes to get out of doing that drill, and this continues to this day. The huge outness here is that having to find a date on a PC is rarely ever needed, and you wouldn't ever need to use it until level 3 anyway. Yet here it was being demanded to be done perfectly at the earliest of auditor training. And get this, after we finished the metering program, a whole new tech film on e-meter reads came out, cancelling everybody's idea of an instant read. And get this, after we finished the metering program, a whole new tech film on e-meter reads came out, cancelling everybody's idea of an instant read. DM himself introduced the film in the Fort Harrison Auditorium, saying the reads on the film were mechanically placed at the exact right point with computer technology so as to show exactly when the read should occur. We saw the film and were in shock. Many of the reads looked prior, before the word was spoken, not at the exact end. I kid you not, everybody was in shock. First FNs, and now he changed the definition of instant reads. So all of that drilling and videoing of instant reads was pretty much worthless, because now Davey insisted that we were calling reads that were latent too late and not reads that were instant to what the auditor or PC said. This then meant tons of drilling and more videoing and bullshit to try to adhere to Dave's ideas. All of this, the years spent on TRs and metering, the changes to things like FNs and instant reads, the make wrong, was basically a low-grade torture for someone who already had his basics in. RTC reps themselves passed videos with errors on them to try to keep up with DM's demands for NOTS auditors to be gotten onto auditing and making lots of money. Flag sends $1 million, or used to at least, to Davey every week. There is something very observable on the training lines at Flag with RTC there. When DM starts demanding completions and progress, all the passes on videos and internships start occurring right then. Up to that point, they are few and far between, with flunks on videos given for the silliest of things that had no relevance to the session. Stops. Many trainees failed to pass their internships because of the required video pass. They could not deliver a perfect session. They eventually, by the way, is there anything by L. Ron Hubbard talking about requiring video things? Like, I mean, they didn't have video cameras that easily back in the 70s and stuff. So, like, is this all just an addition, this whole video camera stuff? Like having video cameras in sessions, like, it's just too much. Many trainees failed, and it seems like it's squirreling. Many trainees failed to pass their internships because of the required video pass. They could not deliver a perfect session. They eventually were sent home or blue. Yet these were supposed to be perfect auditors according to the golden age of tech promotions. They always blamed the trainee, never the drills, never the tech being altered. No way. DM's word is law. Here is another example of arbitraries from Miscavige. If it took 4 can squeezes to get a proper can squeeze, that's it. Game over. You flunked. Never mind if the PC squeezed them harder or lighter, and so it took 4 times to get it right. You suddenly had to conform to DM's standard of 3 times to get the can squeeze, or it's a flunk. This caused many failing videos. And by the way, if you think David Miscavige can't be an SP and stuff, you have to understand what an SP is. He could genuinely actually think he's helping Scientology. He could genuinely be a well-meaning person, right? But when it comes to spotting an SP, you look at their fruits. You look at the end result. What do they actually occur? It doesn't matter if he wanted to help the tech and he wanted to solve this outpoint or this flood problem that was happening at Flag or whatever in the early 90s. It doesn't matter what he was desiring to achieve, right? It doesn't matter if you sit next to someone and they're like nice and well-meaning and stuff, but then they're still sleeping with little babies, right? Like Michael Jackson, right? It doesn't matter that you sit down with Michael Jackson, right? And you have a cup of tea with him. Is actually a nice person, is well-meaning. You look at his freaking fruits. You don't look at what he intends, you look at what he actually achieves. And he actually perverts kids. And he has sex with them. And that is wrong. So he's an SP. You see what I mean? You look at the fruits. So with this, I actually don't think he's that nice or whatever to have a cup of tea with. But if you're going to go down that thing of, but he seems like a nice guy. When it comes to SPs or you ever want to spot them, you don't go by what they say or what they intend. You go by what they achieve. And if overall they cause problems, then they're an SP. If they 51% of the time are doing bad, then they're SPs. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. You overall look at what they're achieving. So that's what David Miscavige is. Overall, he's bad. He's causing a problem. He's an SP. I'm not saying he's some sicko. I'm not saying he's raping kids. I'm not saying he's killing people and stuff. But I'm saying that overall, he's causing bad. And he might be well-intentioned, but he's a freaking SP. Anyway, here is another example of arbitraries from Miscavige. If it took 4 can squeezes to get a proper can squeeze... Making it all the way through to a certified auditor, there is a huge climb. Many don't make it. After the metering course, one of course progresses onto the golden age of tech drills. These drills had different instructions when they first came out. The deal was, if you messed up on the drill, you had to look for and find a misunderstood word every time. This was such an arbitrary. Drills on flying a single rudiment would sometimes take days. Some of the drills were quite tough, but I enjoyed... by the way, if you think I've got a weird Australian accent, I'm going off topic, but anyway... I don't know what's going on with my accent, but I'm weird, but I don't know, maybe it's because I listen to too many American things, but it's just like, my accent's kind of weird anyway. Anyway, some of the drills were quite tough, but I enjoyed a few of them. Pattern drilling the axioms to the wall on the briefing course was memorable, as you had to really grasp the axiom to memorize it. It took a while, but it gave a whole new understanding once you made it. Another good one was the investigatory drill, where you pull strings on the PC's answers during a withhold pulling to get all the data. Other drills were awful. Some have since been revised. The session scenarios were so unreal. On the most advanced drills, we had to do the drill perfectly. No stumble, no stutter, no missed read, all correct sizes of reads, correct meter steering, etc. For an hour and a half. If you flunked, you still had to finish the script before going back to the beginning. People would go into tears on that drill, and many fights with twins would occur over a flub. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. These drills were very tough. Some of them had the coach pretending to try and blow the session, throw the cans at the auditor, roll around on the ground and scream. The drills end up making a robotic auditor. I was able to escape this effect because of thousands of hours in the chair prior to doing them. But the new guys were coming out full on robots, and the PCs often did not feel comfortable with them. It was obvious the program was a failure, yet onwards with all the promotion anyway. All those "we will make you a perfect auditor" period signs were total PR. It became very obvious to me that Miscavige lacked any humility, as he couldn't admit he found a wrong why and had developed an off-source solution to boot. He took a simple idea LRH mentioned of having some drills for various auditing procedures, and he made a big mess. Further, he made the senior CS post very untenable, with a binder full of golden age of tech administrative programs to get done that were impossible to complete. Stupid program targets like inspecting that the student hat drill binders were free of dust would get rejected as a program. Hold on a second, this is wild. Student program targets like inspecting that the student hat drill binders were free of dust, would get rejected as a program because the stats in the academy were not up the week of submission. Then I would be telexed every day demanding compliance. Meanwhile, red-tagged folders needed a folder error summary, a PC was waiting to go in session, an auditor needed cramming, the reg needed a repair program written, and somebody needed me for a drill in the academy. What do you do? Service the public or go do stupid program targets for RTC and management that don't even belong on the case supervisor lines? Yet ethics was considered out if the targets weren't getting done. I hated those programs. I would like to burn that binder if I still had it. I was actually the first. So he seemed to have been a CS back then, a senior CS back then. So he was like, then and had a lot of experience, and then he was having to go in and be retrained on the golden age of tech, and that really would have, talk about something that would make you want to blow. I was actually the first Class 6 Golden Age of Tech case supervisor on the planet. At the time, this was a big deal, but now I look back at the whole package that is the Golden Age of Tech and just shake my head. There are bright spots to the Golden Age of Tech training, but overall it's too long a runway and full of inapplicable drills that bog a student down. Also, importance is stressed on the wrong things and the student gets the wrong idea of what the ideal scene is for a session. It is not checking 15 buttons on the earlier similar problem. Question: staring at the meter looking for, see this whole staring at the meter thing, staring at the meter looking for an FN, asking for a myth withhold 59 different ways, or constantly having to wrestle the PC back into the chair. Fortunately for me, I had already trained under the best auditors and CSs at Flag before the Golden Age of Tech came out, before Miscavige bypassed the fine training lines that the Captain FSO Debbie Cook had already put there and made sure were perfect continuously. It was Debbie Cook and her staff who made me a product, not the Miscavige arbitraries and BS that were thrown into the training lines. The other startling thing was how arrogant the new Class 6s, Class 4s were. It had all gone to their head that they were perfect, and it took a long time to get through to some of them that it was their robotic TRs and inability to audit the PCs in front of them and not a lifeless doll that was ruining the session. Yet these were perfect Golden Age of Tech auditors. Davies' Golden Age of Tech is an epic fail. But if you dared imply anything remotely like this, trouble. I wrote DM while on my post and expressed the trouble some students were having with the metering course, specifically the dating drills. I went over some LRH references and pointed out this was a skill not needed at the lowest levels of auditing. He wrote me back and said I had bought the problems the students were making in the course room and that the drills were necessary. He told me to go into the course room and correct their TR1 and metering. The metering course is still slow and a bottleneck to this day. It was never an LRH course to begin with. The only thing many of those new auditors were perfect at, see, do people realize that who are in the church? They realize stuff like this, like there's courses that aren't even LRH courses. Do they realize that the Success Through Communication course isn't even an LRH course? You know, the only thing many of these new students were perfect at was throwing the PC out of session with robotic TRs, distractive metering, and a lack of understanding of how to audit. They thought since they knew the drill script so well they could handle any session. Little did they realize how varied a session can be. Yeah, exactly. And what can go wrong. So sessions can be varied and stuff, but these robot auditors were thrown off by the variedness of the PC's answers and what can actually come up. You know, anyway. I had to retrain the auditors that came back from Flag when it was supposed to be vice versa. Training was best at flag when RTC was off the lines and out of the way. The best coaching comes from good coaches, and no script or drill binder can replace it. Flag has some very caring tech staff that know how to make good orders. They got invalidated all to hell, and many were taken off tech lines by DM. Those were good people. You can see Class 12s doing reg tours now. Well, most of those were the victims, to say nothing of the Class 9s, Class 8s and Class 6s. The blind are leading the blind was a right way. The blind are leading the blind was a right why, but only in the respect that David Miscavige is leading. John Nunes, Senior CS from the Advanced Org of the Great Plains in the middle of America. So if you want to become a squirrel Scientologist that isn't really a squirrel, because here on Earth it's full of lies. Squirrel Scientologist is actually a Scientologist that applies standard tech. If you're in a church and you're listening to this, that's the big secret about squirrel Scientology. It's not squirrel, it's actually more standard than the church is, and it's RTC that's actually squirrel. Anyway, there's a place you can go where you can get standard tech. Anyway, that's it. That's it for this reading. I've gone longer than what I planned, but there was a lot to say. I hope you liked it. Hope you realize the truth about the golden age of tech. I've been your host, Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. You've been listening to the Indie Scientology podcast. So remember, what you thought was impossible, squirrel Scientology, is possible, actually standard Scientology.